Thank you. Cheryl is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, Secretary Austin, thank you for your commitment to our armed forces and your service to our country. Gentlemen, both of you briefly touched on long-range precision and hypersonic fires in your testimony and the important role such a capability would play not only in integrated deterrence, but also in enabling success in multi-domain operations. As we work swiftly to modernize the Joint Force, more specifically our long-range fires platforms, what ground-based platforms can commanders depend on to provide that capability, and how, if at all, has the range displayed by Russian artillery in their war of aggression in Ukraine changed that thinking? How is the Department planning to increase our range without increasing our vulnerability to ground-based missile defense systems?
Thanks, Congresswoman. We've got a number of long-range systems in the inventory today, but what the Army in particular, but also the Marine Corps, are working on are experimental long-range fire systems. Those are rocket, some are hypersonic, and some are tube artillery. And these go very, very long range. I won't get into. We can have a team come over and give you a classified briefing on some of the experimental things that are going on. But we recognize that long range and long range precision fires, I'd even put that caveat on it, are critical to the future operational environment. That's proven true over and over and over again. And the ability, we're a maneuver-based military, and for maneuver, you have to have fires, plus the movement, the mobility of the force. Combined gives you maneuver at the lower levels of the tactical level. So we want to make sure that we have dominance in fires. That's one of the critical areas of development in each of the services, but particularly the ground services.
And General Milley, would you consider the strategic long-range cannon an asset that would enable combatant commanders to succeed in multi-domain operations?
Yes, in fact, yes, it's the basis of what the Army's calling multi-domain task force and what the Marines are calling the littoral regiments is that cannon system. So that is let's use the scenario of the South China Seas with those capabilities. Based off shore-based long-range precision munitions, they should be able to do a significant amount of damage to any surface fleet, perhaps Chinese surface fleet. So the point is that system, that particular system you mentioned, is one of those in experimental development, and it'll be a key to a future warfight.
And as the Army modernizes its indirect fire capabilities, will the SLRC contribute to the integrated deterrence model? And can you speak on the importance that further developing a capability like that will have towards establishing a modern force? You spoke a little bit about, for example, in China, how important that is.
Yes, I think this will be a lengthy conversation, but we have to start with the operating environment we're going to operate in and the changing character of war that Chairman Smith mentioned up front. Once we fully analyze that and understand that, what we derive is a set of attributes that come for each of the services, in particular in the Joint Force combined.
Speaking of that, would that be appropriate for the Marine Corps as well? And their
oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, and what the Marines are doing is upgrading their force. And I'm aware of the debate that's ongoing with the Marines. But what they're trying to do is tailor the Marines to optimize their capability as part of the Joint Force in a future operating environment under a changed character of war. And there's a lot of nuance to that which would be much beyond the time available here. But the key is the development of the doctrine, the organization, the personnel, the training, all of those things in combination to set us up for operations in the 2030s. And that's what this budget is all about, actually.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And with the Army's extended range cannon artillery system that was designed to close the capabilities gap between the U.S. and our adversaries, is there a plan to field a towed extended range version of the Mike 777?
The M777, well, there is already a 155 extended range towed version. So I think the short answer is yes, but that's not the system we're talking about. We're talking about the long-range precision fires that the Army's developing. That's not fielded yet at scale. There's some experimental units that are using it right now. They did some recent tests at White Sands, which have proven quite successful, but that's not yet in the field.
And then as we work to build the capabilities within our hypersonic suite, is there not a need for a land-based, long-range, surface-to-surface artillery asset that is more cost-effective than the common hypersonic glide body and is readily available to combatant commanders seeking to strike critical targets such as headquarters, maintenance, or supply facilities?
I apologize, but the gentlelady's time
I'll
has
take
Short
that
answer,
question
yes,
for the record.
the Army's developing that.
Thank you.
Actually.
Mr. Green is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the ranking member. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. And I want to, again, echo my amazing opportunity to bump into H- there in Poland and see your previous unit that you commanded and a unit that I commanded. I'll tell you, they're doing fantastic work, and so is Kevin Sharp, the brigade from the 101st. They're just doing outstanding stuff. Brief comment, 4% raise for troops in an 8% inflation environment isn't a raise. I wish we could rethink that, and certainly I'm sure there'll be amendments that address it. Also on the top line number, 4% in an 8% inflation is really a cut. Just want to make that comment. Mr. McCord, a quick comment for you. I saw a statement that you had made. The budget was written prior to the Ukrainian invasion and could not be adjusted to include that. I want to tell you that and I'm talking specifically about making adjustments due to what's going on in Ukraine. There's not a company in America where the board of directors would allow the CEO to say that. The speed of business is the speed of now, and the Pentagon's got to move at the speed of business, the speed of now. And so, in the few weeks that this thing's been going on, I would think that the adjustments could be made. Secretary Austin, quick question for you. Who is advising the president that it's a good idea to allow the war criminals in Russia to build a nuclear reactor for Iran? In the JCPOA, the current negotiations would allow Russia to build a nuclear reactor to the tune of $10 billion. These are the guys that, have done these horrible things in Ukraine, and we're here letting them, at least right now, considering letting them build a nuclear reactor there.
Well, there are a number of people that are leading that process. Of course, our national security advisor, plus, as you know, the State Department is leading the.
Let me ask you: is there somebody at DOD saying that's a good idea? Do you think it's a good idea?
No, I have not provided any counsel to the president on building.
I would ask you to do that. I think it's a really bad idea. I want to talk legacy systems, General Milley, with you, if it's okay. We've had discussions before about phasing out legacy systems, bringing in new systems with the capability to overcome those and amplify on them. I'm a little concerned about JSTARS. We Army guys, we love that program. It helps us, and there's, I guess, talk in this budget of the Air Force wanting to get rid of JSTARS. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, and maybe we have to go into a classified setting, is there going to be a capability gap if that thing goes away?
Well, first, like you, JSTAR is a great system, but this budget and the National Defense Strategy is optimizing for the pacing threat, the most significant strategic challenge to the United States, China, and then the acute challenge or the acute threat, which is Russia. JSTARS is not a survivable aircraft in that type of environment against that high-end threat. So that's point one. Point two, in terms of the capability that JSTARS does bring, which is the ability to battle track movements, et cetera, on the ground.
Targeting.
I'm sorry.
Targeting, too.
Targeting,
right?
that's right. And that capability will exist in a different form and from a different platform, but for that I'd have to take it to a different session.
So there's no capability loss with that, with JSTARS going away?
I don't know, no significant capability loss relative to China and Russia. If you wanted to use JSTARS in a lower intensity environment, then there would be, because the JSTARS would be going away. But we're optimizing for China than Russia.
I may then ask for that classified discussion so we can kind of go into that. One quick thought about this legacy fall off and the implementation of the new systems that are 5-6 years out. I know Congressman Whitman has talked about this challenge. I'm aware that there's this strategic deterrence fund that hasn't been used for years. I'd love to get some details on that if y'all have it, because we could protect the guys across the aisle who don't necessarily want to see massive increases in the budget we could fund some of the R&D for these new projects through that, and it would be similar to the way we did the OCO, and sort of put money over there I would ask that be considered. And even speaking to some of my Democrat colleagues, they think that'd be a great idea about future systems so that we can maintain the capabilities in that gap period. Keep legacy systems around long enough, afford them in the current budget, and pay for the new systems in a different strategic fund. And if you could look into that and get back with my office, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Escobar is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this important hearing, and thank you, Secretary Austin and General Milley, for your service and for your time before us today. I have the honor and privilege of serving, representing El Paso, Texas, home to Fort Bliss, America's second largest military installation and the largest joint mobilization force generation installation in the Army, home to the 1st Armored Division and Joint Modernization Command. I'm so pleased to see $15 million in the budget for a new fire station at Fort Bliss, and we'll work to ensure that that funding is included in this year's NDAA. Fort Bliss, its people and infrastructure are critical to our military's readiness. From my first day as the Congresswoman for this great military installation, I've advocated for the investments needed for our assets and missions. I'm going to do it again here today. There are 2 infrastructure priorities that we need to fund critical to our readiness. The first is a modest investment in a railhead. The current rail infrastructure and design is a limiting factor in efficient movement of military equipment in support of deployments. Punting on providing funding for the railhead further degrades Fort Bliss's ability to mobilize and demobilize troops that come from every corner of the country because of the installation's mission as a joint mobilization force generation installation. Fort Hood has a similar number of assets and missions, but a larger railhead. Bliss is doing the best they can, but a larger railhead will allow them to better meet the DOD shift to meet the challenges of today and tomorrow, namely China. The second is the need for new barracks. I've been in the barracks at Fort Bliss and can tell you they are in poor shape and inadequately cooled. In a desert environment like El Paso, where we've had more record-breaking triple-digit temperatures each year as a result of the climate crisis, the barracks can become so hot I can easily see someone passing out as a result. I know there's some 3D printing innovation going on, but I want to emphasize that degraded living spaces and substandard facilities at our installations lowers morale, increases health and safety risks, and negatively impacts retention, which in turn affects our readiness. I provide these 2 examples in order to make sure that Fort Bliss remains top of mind to you, and also to point out that our readiness is directly tied to the infrastructure we have here at home at key installations like Fort Bliss. Secretary Austin and General Milley, could you talk about where you see Fort Bliss fitting into the department's plans for addressing the pacing challenge with China and modernizing our military?
Well, as you've said, Fort Bliss houses some of our most capable forces there with our armor forces and also some air defense capability. So it is an important installation to us. And I share your concerns with making sure that we have the right facilities for our troops and make sure that our troops are taken care of. That's very, very important to me. We'll make sure that we go back and work with the Army to see where things stand in priority and get a better understanding of when and how these things are funded.
And I would just echo what the Secretary said. Fort Bliss is a strategic platform for the deployment of some really significant combat power in the Armored Division that's there. And as mentioned through many previous member comments about the importance of air defense systems, Patriot, and so on, that's all done at Fort Bliss. And then, of course, you know as well as I do that Fort Bliss is adjacent to White Sands Missile Range. A lot of testing for modernization is done there. So we want to make sure that the railheads are good so they can deploy the force. We want to make sure the barracks is squared away to ensure that the force itself is being taken care of so we can achieve those strategic objectives. I'll get with the Chief of Staff of the Army I wasn't, as you know, I'm former Chief of Staff of the Army. I wasn't tracking the barracks at Bliss have deteriorated that bad, but let me get back to you on an answer for that.
Appreciate it. And in my remaining 30 seconds, I just want to emphasize, as we've heard some of my colleagues talk about legacy systems, it's really on Congress. It's important to us that we heed the advice that you've given us in classified and unclassified settings about the need to invest in the right way. My time is up. I yield back. Thank you both. And by the way, invite you both. Would be honored to host you at Fort Bliss. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Carl is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for willingness to come in here and speak to us. I've got 3 quick points and 1 question. So, you know, when you get to me, you're at the end of the line. So that's the good news. You know, on this defense budget, I personally am tired of a defense budget process that does not supply our troops or meet our global defensive needs. For example, reducing our naval fleet in order to stretch insufficient personnel across fewer ships indicates how backwards our defense spending approach has become. Second point, our withdrawal of Afghanistan indicates a completely avoidable failure of leadership and has made the world and our homeland less safe rather than more safe. And the third point, our refueling capability is essential, especially given the challenges presented by the Indo-Pacific. Last year in this same setting, we had this conversation. I asked you both, General Milley, I asked you both where we are essentially on the circumstances with the KC-46. We were briefed last week that the KC-46 is capable of refueling 86% of our aircraft. Would anyone in this room buy a car with the idea of it working 86% of the time and not 100% of the time? So my frustration is really with this KC-46, and my question, General Milley and General Austin, I ask both of you, why are we not moving forwards with the next generation tanker, the LMXT, which I understand is serving us quite well in Europe?
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, first, on your comment about refueling in general, that is a strategic capability that we've got to sustain, improve, because the legs of aircraft, especially over the Pacific, are too short on a single tank of gas to be involved in the Chinese warfight, given that the Chinese do have anti-access capabilities. Point 1. Point 2 is the survivability of those aircraft is every bit as important as their ability to refuel an aircraft. So those are particularly vulnerable aircraft. So those 2 things have to be worked on. In this particular budget, if memory serves me right, I think there's 15 KC-46s as part of this. We are phasing out some KC-135s. And I agree with you on the LMX piece. I think that is the next generation. We need to get going with that because that is more survivable and it handles a greater ability to refuel the fleet. So I'm not in disagreement with any of that, but refueling is a critical strategic capability that we have. And if you take it back to the American way of war, what makes us so much different than many other countries is our ability to project combat power very rapidly at great distances from continental United States. And refueling, along with a maritime fleet, along with many other capabilities, are what enable us to do that. So that's a key area of investment that we need to continue to do.
Thank you, sir.
I agree with what the chairman has said. Refueling capability is a significant part of our strategic advantage. And we have to make sure that we maintain the capability to fuel or refuel all of our aircraft. And so for a period of time, we'll need to make sure we have a kind of a blend of capabilities so until we get some of the problems fixed on the 46. But investing in the next generation, I think, is the right thing to do. So I agree with what you've raised, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now I yield my time.
Mr. Golden is recognized.
Thank you, Secretary Austin and General Milley. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for your lifetime of service to the country's defense. You know, sitting here for now 3 hours, similar to the way that you two have, it occurs to me that these hearings obviously are very important. That's why we do them. That the oversight is critical. The debate, I think, can be a real source of strength in the policy-making process when done correctly and done, I think, in a general act of good faith. We've also seen some examples where perhaps it's not helpful in regards to the message it can send to the world, to our friends and our foes, and most importantly, to the American people. In regards to that, I want to talk about something we really haven't talked about today, and that's a recent opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal you may have seen, written by a former member of Congress, as well as a former secretary of a cabinet of a different presidential administration past. And what's concerning about it, I think, is the message that it sends to the American people and to others who are paying attention. And this has to do with the Commandant of the Marine Corps' current force redesign. I wanted to ask a couple of questions about this, and I'm going to start with General Milley. It says here that there are people out there who are feeling that it is unclear, particularly for people with experience in military planning, what formal review and coordination was required of the Commandant before, his words, the author of this opinion piece, before the Commandant unilaterally announced a policy that would alter the Marine Corps. It goes on to say that the law doesn't give the Commandant carte blanche to make significant changes in force structure, but rather Title X provides that the Commandant performs his duties subject to the authority, direction, and control of the Secretary of the Navy, who also, by the way, is subject to the authority, direction, and control of the Secretary of Defense, and that finally the President retains ultimate authority as Commander-in-Chief. The next paragraph here says that there's a problem in a restructuring of this scale having moved through without full consideration and debate in front of the proper offices within the Pentagon, such as the Defense Resource Board or others, and that a formal approval by the SecDef should have been conducted before it was sent to the White House for further review and then sent to Congress for oversight hearings. Lastly, I would point out that the opinion piece asserts that this announcement was made during COVID, making it difficult for congressional oversight to take place. And I think perhaps for you, General Milley, most concerning, it asserts that due to the chaos that existed in the Pentagon during the 2020 campaign year and post-election turbulence, that perhaps this proposal has just floated through improper channels. And so I wanted to ask you, you've been around in this position since October of 2019. Do you have any concern along the way, having had this restructure announced in March of 2020, that the proper process has not been followed?
No, and I read the piece by Senator Webb, and I have enormous respect for Senator Webb, by the way.
As do I.
Navy Cross winner, Marine, veteran, a tremendous Navy Secretary, et cetera. I read the piece, and Dave Berger, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Berger, he pretty rigorously thought this through with the Marine Corps staff and the Navy staff, and he did brief it up through various elements within the Department of Defense. I can't say about the White House piece. I assume he does hearings as well. I'm assuming that the oversight committees have heard it many times about the restructuring of the Marine 2030 plan. But let's take a look just for a second. What are they actually doing materially? What are they physically doing? Reducing by 3 infantry battalions. That certainly, there's only 31 infantry battalions in the Marine Corps, so it's not a large force to begin with.
We're almost out of time. Let me just say,
okay.
I think it's important. You were aware that the Marine Corps was moving forward.
We were absolutely
You're aware that they've been in front of Congress for oversight.
We were aware, and I'm also aware the alumni community of the Marine Corps is quite upset about it.
The Secretary of the Navy under multiple administrations was aware of this and approved it. Obviously, it was green-lighted to come.
I believe the answer is yes to all that.
And you're committed to ensuring that proper process is followed going forward. Because my understanding of the Marines is as they're implementing this, they're also flexible and they're learning lessons and making adjustments, correct? So
totally. I have no problem with the process that was followed, and that may not have come clear to the Senator or others out in the alumni community. But inside the Pentagon, it's my belief anyway, because I saw it and so did many members of the Department of Defense, and I know the committees of oversight saw it. So I think that part of the
The
process.
gentleman's time has expired.
It's an important point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Rogers.
Madam Chair, I ask unanimous consent that all committee members have 3 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous materials into the record.
Without objection, so ordered. Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore is recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ranking Member. The F-35 Joint Strike Fighter strengthens national security, enhances global partnerships, and powers economic growth across our nation. I agree with Air Force Chief of Staff Brown that the F-35 is indeed the cornerstone of Air Force modernization. It remains the most lethal, survivable, and connected fighter in the world, giving pilots an advantage against any adversary, and then most importantly, enabling them to execute their mission to come home safely. At Hill Air Force Base in Utah, our 388th Fighter Wing is the Air Force's first active-duty, combat-capable F-35A Lightning unit. Right now, F-35s from the base's 34th Squadron have been deployed to Germany in response to Russia's aggression in the Ukraine. However, I am concerned that these fifth-generation aircraft have not consistently been accompanied with equally modern and advanced weaponry. The weaponry to accompany fifth-generation aircraft must include cyber and electronic warfare capabilities, superior radars and sensors, unmanned capabilities, and the ability to defeat rapidly relocatable targets in an anti-access environment. From my understanding, JASM and LRASM and the stand-and attack weapon can help the F-35 reach its full potential as fifth-generation fighter. Secretary Austin, again, thank you all for being here and for your service. Can you provide an update on the implementation of advanced weaponry for the F-35 with battle management capabilities needed to address an increasingly adversarial threats?
Yeah, so we're working hard to make sure that we do in fact achieve the upgrades going forward that you mentioned, and we are able to integrate the capabilities from cyber and information that you mentioned. That's a work in progress. We will continue to invest in precision-guided munitions because that's really, really important to us. And you've seen us invest in the upgrade of those precision-guided munitions to make sure that they're survivable.
And I like to look at it, and as I dig into this with my team and some of my stakeholders back home, I like to, you make a comparison. We have an $80 million plane that we are putting 50-year-old weapons technology into. Important piece, especially as we talk about the budget today. Do you think there has been enough attention given to the weaponry available to the F-35?
Well, one of my priorities is to ensure that we continue to invest in the upgrade of our PGMs and that we have sufficient quantities of PGMs on hand. So we're going to continue to invest in this.
Yeah, thank you. My last question is related to the number. The number of F-35s. The DOD is insistent it still plans to seek a total of 1,763 F-35s. However, at a rate of 33 per year, that would take half a century. How is a decreased F-35 buy justified to meet the needs of peer competition in, the very apparent and obvious adversarial AORs that are increasing across our globe? Just kind of comment on, are we doing enough on this F-35 buy, and by decreasing it, are we ready for the next fights?
So peer competition is exactly what we have in mind, and we want to make sure that we have the right mix of capabilities in the inventory as we go forward. And as you look across the fight-up, you'll see that we invest in F-35s in a significant way. But the F-35 and the F-22 have specific roles in the fight, and they are very, very capable aircraft. But other aircraft are also relevant, and so we want to make sure we have the right mix.
I've been impressed with, one of the highlights of this role. I'm in my first term of Congress, and one of the highlights is interacting individually with the pilots back on our Air Force Base. I think a lot of us have that chance to go and hear their perspective, and they have such incredible ideas and such closeness to these weapon systems. And I know there's a real strong desire for their voice to be heard, and the airmen, as they work on these every day, and just will constantly encourage. There's no question here. I just want to constantly encourage our leadership and our committee to be thinking about what that direct base level input is and how important that is, because they have amazing ideas, and I just wanted to take this opportunity amidst the turmoil going on in the world to thank them for their service and really appreciate from every base, but particularly where we have assets deployed from Ogden, Utah right now, and Layton. Thank you. Yield back.
Mrs. Luria is recognized.
Well, thank you, General Milley. I noticed earlier in a comment to Mr. Bacon, you said that I don't think we're taking too much risk with regards to China and Russia. So one of the things that when we look at the budget, we look at what's in it, what's not in it, the things that are unfunded requirements list, there's risk associated with each of those choices that were made based off of the top line and what you've included in the budget coming over to us. And I know that in Title 10, it requires a chairman's risk assessment, which would normally be submitted annually by February 15th. Have you submitted the risk assessment this year?
Have not. Typically in sequence, it goes national security strategy, then national defense strategy, then national military strategy, then the budget, then the chairman's risk assessment. So, but anyway, I have it. It's in draft, and it'll be submitted shortly. So talk risk for just a second. So the way we do that, the way I do it, and the way we have, as a department, have done it, well, the Joint Staff has done it, is take a look at the probability and the consequence of a specific event, and then measure it against the risk to force, risk to mission, evaluate against time and the cost to troops. How much? What are you going to lose in terms of bodies? So
can I jump in really quickly? So when was the last time the risk assessment was done?
it was 2 years ago.
Okay, right. So August of 2020. Asking also perhaps why it wasn't done last year. But I've reviewed the previous risk assessments, and they don't really follow the format that you're stating, and also they don't really follow the format as required in Title 10 and include all of the elements in them that are necessary, which I think was written that way because that allows us to make decisions, perhaps adding additional resources to the defense budget.
Sure.
So go ahead, please. I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll do better on rewriting it in accordance with the formats, but my point being is the substance of any risk assessment that we do is relative to that. So the probability, we're evaluating risk in this for this budget in this NDS relative to China and Russia, and specific to China. When I said my comment to Mr. Bacon earlier about I don't think it's too much risk. I think that we've mitigated risk relative to China, and I think that the probability of armed conflict with China, the consequence would be high, but the probability is not high in the near term in terms of this particular budget. Now, as you get in the out years,
what do you define by
I think that the out years is beyond 5 years. So beyond the flight.
That does not concur with what we've heard from Admiral Davidson and
what Admiral Davidson said and Admiral Aquilino said was they said that the probability or the capability of China to attack Taiwan is going to be 2027. Capability, not probability.
Okay.
And that is exactly what President Xi charged his military to do.
Okay. Well, I would say that myself and many others on this committee interpreted Admiral Aquilino and Davidson's statements differently, but as we're limited in time.
They were interpreted differently, but what they said was the capability to attack Taiwan was to be developed by 2027. That's not the same as a decision to attack Taiwan.
I think that they said that there was a high probability within the next 6 years, now 5 years, and I've had that conversation directly with Admiral Aquilino. But just so that we can get through the question about risk.
Okay.
So, you know, the purpose is to say how the current and future risk changes with regards to the budget that's submitted. And so with the budget priorities, the trade-offs, the physical constraints. And so there's some things in here. I mean, we're decomming 24 ships. We're only building 8. You say 9. We're delaying the laws for the Marine Corps to come to the fight in the Pacific. We're not maximizing our shipbuilding capacity. We could build 15 DDGs. We're only building 10. We're stopping the LPD production line. We're pushing out the LHA, the unfunded requirements list. Risk, like what are the things that can prevent an invasion of Taiwan? You know, it's the bottom of the unfunded requirements list for offensive mining. Is the Air Force investing in long-range anti-surface missiles, LRASM? You know, these things that, in my mind, are priorities to accomplish our goals, or some of them not even funded or not funded sufficiently. So you've made decisions there to fund this, but put this on the unfunded requirements list, so there's a risk. So that is what I feel is not being communicated to the committee. And you're here requesting $773 billion, and I feel like you haven't provided, you know, the most basic information necessary to understand what this budget will or will not do for the defense.
Well, there's 30 seconds left, so as quickly as I can. I don't think that decommissioning ships that are 30 years old that have no relevance to a fight against China,
Okay,
or
I
limited
think-
relevance.
Don't have time in 30 seconds to cover this topic, but I do think that I'm looking forward to reading about that in the risk assessment when it's submitted soon. So thank you,
I
John.
don't think it's excessive risk.
Mrs. Bice is recognized.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to Secretary Austin and General Milley for spending an extraordinary amount of time with us today. Secretary Austin, I understand that the Air Force plans to begin phasing out a number of the E-3 Century aircraft in 2023. As you know, this is an important platform for command and control, target detection, and battle management. I am concerned that if we phase out this aircraft without the replacement of the E-7 online, then we will lose critically needed combat capability. I'm also concerned that bases like Tinker Air Force Base would experience a decline in associated institutional knowledge, readiness, and workforce proficiency if we can't transition this workforce to the E-7 concurrently. Secretary, can you tell me how the department plans to fill the capability gap of the E-3 aircraft if they are retired without a replacement in hand?
Yeah, so we'll need to manage the transition to make sure that we have adequate capability on hand as we bring on new capabilities.
But at the current time, we're talking about taking out E-3s before those E-7s are even being built.
Yeah, so, and there are other platforms and ways to give us the situational awareness that we need, and we'll leverage those platforms. But we'll continue to manage, the transition to ensure that we have what we need to be relevant in the fight going forward.
Are you suggesting that there is some other platform that's being considered to replace the capability of the E-3?
There are a number of platforms that we'll use to create the situational awareness or provide the situational awareness that you've alluded to.
But an aircraft may not be it.
A number of capabilities.
Thank you. Like many of my colleagues, I feel that the defense budget, in some cases, inadequately addresses the threats that we're facing today. I very much appreciate the pay increases for our service members in the budget, but as has been mentioned many times over, the pay increase does not actually cover the current cost of inflation. That's essentially a pay cut for our service members and their families. With the recent technological breakthroughs made by China and the growing military budgets of our foreign adversaries, do you think the president's budget, which fails to keep pace with inflation, is appropriate and adequate to counter these rising threats?
This is a significant budget, and it provides us the capability, the ability to go after the capabilities we need to support our warfighting concepts and our strategy overall. A significant budget.
I want to piggyback off of what Representative Lurie mentioned with the risk assessment. And General Milley, if you'd like to comment on this piece of this, the conversation has really focused on military readiness and or military equipment. How much emphasis are we putting on cyber and space? I think that's a piece that in some cases is maybe being put on the back burner. I remember in the opening testimony, I think there's $2 billion that's being invested. But how much are we really focused on ensuring that we have the proper capabilities from a cyber and space perspective? This
budget is putting in $27 billion, I think it is, into space. That's the space specific, and then there's probably additional monies throughout the Air Force and Space Command and Space Force beyond that 27, and then I think it's 11 or 12 billion into cyber. So I think that's pretty significant investments in both of those domains.
Any comments, Secretary Austin?
The Chairman's got it exactly right. 27.6 billion in space and over $11 billion for cyber.
Do you think that $2 billion for AI is adequate?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
Right. Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Panetta is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gentlemen, good morning. Thank you for your service, and of course, thank you for being here. Obviously, I think the invasion of Ukraine is pretty much, I believe, it's revitalized democracies, and as the administration and President has said, it's strengthened our NATO's resolve. And we've seen that, basically, in the fact that you're seeing other NATO countries beefing up their forces. And that includes what we're doing in regards to the defense budget that you submitted The $813 billion, very, very large on its face. However, when you look at it compared to this year's budget, it's just 2% more. Also, you take into account inflation and the 2.5% of our budget, which is sort of an optimistic number. Some are actually saying that it's going to be a real terms cut in regards to defense spending, and that Congress is going to have to do what it did this year and add probably close to $30 billion. Moreover, the budget does not take into account what's spent on nukes, what's spent on resettling of Afghans, and our help with Ukraine at this point. Additionally, the release of this budget is before the release of the national security strategy. So just quickly, combined with the inflation rate, one, do you think this is a cut? This is going to be a cut in defense spending? And two, because it doesn't take into account the national security strategy, will we need to review this budget at a later time?
Thanks, Congressman. We actually built this budget based upon our national defense strategy. And the national defense strategy, as you know, has been released. And again, we made a significant effort to ensure that this budget gave us the capabilities that we needed to execute that strategy. So to answer your question, yes. And I do think, again, this is a substantial budget, and it gives us the ability to go after those capabilities.
Understood. In regards, and thank you for that, Mr. Secretary. In regards to NATO, looking at the Diana project, which I'm sure you're very aware of, which I believe will reinforce the transatlantic cooperation in important areas like hypersonic weapons and, of course, space technology. Secretary Austin, do you believe that the Diana project offers the type of framework that we need to improve and refine NATO's capabilities to design, build, and validate our missile defense programs?
I do. It's one of a number of things that that will provide NATO the ability to be forward-looking, and of course, we'll go in and NATO will go in and review its requirements and concepts going forward. So, but in terms of us, the United States of America, we routinely work with allies and partners to as we develop additional capabilities. And I pointed to AUKUS earlier on. That not only is focused on development of a submarine, but also working with our partner in developing technologies in AI and hypersonics and other things.
Great. And in regards, obviously you've heard a number of questions in this hearing and in other hearings, or at least I have heard many of my colleagues talk about the deterrence. Do you believe that Diana will help our NATO allies as we continue to face, obviously, the challenges, but fortify a collective deterrent?
Well, what will help us most going forward is our ability to remain united and committed to defending, excuse me, NATO territory. Again, there are a number of things that go into this equation. Sharing of information, for example, is one of those things, which enabled us to create transparency and bolster confidence, and led to what we're seeing in excuse me, in NATO right now. And that's largely it's largely a measure of what the President, his decision early on to do things to help us be able to share insights and information with our partners. And that transparency has really been helpful to us.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. McClain is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. I want to follow up on Ms. Loria's question. As it pertains to risk, when do you think we'll have the risk assessment piece done?
Yeah, that's my responsibility to get that done, get it submitted to the Secretary and the President. Probably, my guess is in the next couple of weeks.
And then, okay.
Yeah.
If you go through the risk...
And that gets submitted to you as well. It's not just to the Secretary and the President.
Thank you. If in that risk assessment we find some glaring risks that maybe we didn't foresee, at that time I'm assuming we will make some changes to the budget?
That's part of the idea, is to submit it to the Secretary and the President and to the Congress that if there are errors or glaring errors.
But not errors, but significant risk.
Yeah.
Because I'm
that's
trying to
right.
wrap my head around.
Significant risk has to be covered by the mitigating factors of the budget.
Yeah. I'm trying to wrap my head around how we put together a budget, but we don't really have a good risk assessment. Am I not understanding that correctly?
No, we do, well, I participate in the budget, and my staff does as well. So there is a iterative process of risk assessment throughout.
So we have a general idea. Okay, thank you, sir. Then I need some clarification from both of you on the President's budget requests for combat vehicles. Can you explain the Army's rationale for the precipitous drop in vehicle procurement, specifically the Abrams tank, and what risks are we incurring with that drop in procurement of the Abrams tanks?
Well, first, we've got about 4,000 or 5,000 tanks in the inventory. So again, it's relative to the national defense strategy, and we are optimizing the military for a fight that'll occur sometime, if it occurs at all, hopefully it never does, in the 2030s. And tanks may or may not, probably not, play a very significant role in a war against China in the 2030s. What will play a really significant role will be space and cyber, but also air defense systems, long-range precision fires, naval capabilities, and air capabilities, and
so we just don't
subforce.
see a ground war,
With
so
China,
to speak.
The ground will have the ground forces, Marine and Army, will play an important role, but the dominant role will be played by the air and maritime forces.
With that, then, the Air Force is the oldest, smallest, and least ready in its entire history. The Air Force leadership has repeatedly explained that they need to procure at least 72 fighter aircraft. However, in 23 DOD budget cuts the Air Force new tactical combat aircraft only to buy 57. So with the future being in air and space where we really need, why are we not fulfilling the 72? Why are we only procuring 57 if that's the future?
I thought it was, well,
Maybe I have a
minor point, I thought it was 61, but.
Well, let's even say it's 61. It's still less than what has been
exactly.
requested, right?
Yeah, the Air Force opted to want to buy and purchase and return that money for to build a Block 4 F-35, which is the most advanced of the versions, right? So the ones that are being chosen not to buy, those are Block 3s. So we want to get the most advanced versions of these aircraft. The F-35 is going to be the quarterback of the joint force in a fight in the Western Pacific. That aircraft is critical, and we want the most modern capabilities, and that's what we're purchasing.
So we're taking the same money, we're just deferring it to a different
That's the idea behind what CQ Brown and Secretary of the Air Force have decided to do.
Okay.
Right.
And just an overall question in my last minute is, it appears with inflation being, 8% and our budget being less than inflation, we've all talked about it, we're not keeping up with inflation. One of the risks that I'm assuming that we're assessing is the risks on how we look to our adversaries and our allies in terms of our budget weakness. And I say that is if I look at China, for example, which is one of our major adversaries, right? They are spending, maybe even overspending, some could argue. We are cutting back. What message do you think that sends to our allies and adversaries, sir?
Yeah, so I don't think we're cutting back. I think this is a substantial budget. $700, $750 billion, a lot of money. The Chinese are spending about $500 billion, $560 billion or so on their announced budget. If you factor in things like
And I apologize, the lady's time has expired.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Horsford is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. Secretary Austin, it's my understanding that the Air Force intends to submit a legislative proposal this year requesting expanded usage of the Nevada Test and Training Range located in my district. This new proposal would come amid the ongoing effort by the Navy to reach an accessible compromise with local stakeholders regarding modernization of the Fallon Range training complex. I am deeply concerned, and I want to bring to your attention that the Nevada delegation has still not been consulted on the Nevada Test and Training Range proposal or been given details regarding the Air Force's plan. So my question is, when will the Air Force share their proposal with the Nevada delegation and our constituents? And can you commit to ensuring that the department works collaboratively with our delegation as well as our local, state, and tribal leaders to develop an accessible proposal for joint use in the Nevada Test and Training Range?
On the first part of the question, in terms of when they intend to share, I'll take that for the record and get back to you on what their plan is. And yes, you have my commitment to make sure that we're transparent in what we're doing. So.
Thank you, sir. I look forward to working with you. I'd like to shift now to the small community of remotely piloted aircraft crews shouldering the burden of over-the-horizon operations in the Middle East and around the world. As the Air Force works to identify ways to improve quality of life for RPA crews, I want to ensure that the department is leveraging all available tools already at its disposal. Secretary Austin, has the department considered expanding the combat zone tax exclusion to RPA crews flying in support of named combat operations? Given their direct participation in these operations, would you support this expansion?
Well, in terms of expanding the combat zone, that's a thing that's is relevant to the area that we're actually fighting in, and that's physical space on the ground. As to whether or not we provide credit to the troops that are engaged in activities there, it's a different issue. I know it's one that the Air Force has taken up before. I certainly support rewarding and awarding those airmen, soldiers, sailors that have participated in meaningful ways appropriately.
Thank you.
Yeah.
General Milley, given the unique burdens and stressors faced by RPA crews, would you commit to exploring the expansion of this program, the Special Operations Command's Preservation of the Force and Family Program, to include RPA crews flying in support of combat operations?
I'll absolutely take a look at that along with the Secretary. Absolutely.
Thank you. Changing subjects. In recent months, we've seen a concerning rise in attacks on LGBT rights in state houses across the country. These include efforts to deny life-saving medical care to our most vulnerable youth and a range of other potentially deadly policies. Secretary Austin, what steps is the department taking to shield active duty service members and their dependents from these hateful attacks? And are state laws denying or restricting gender-affirming care considered during the PCS process for service members with impacted dependents?
Yeah, there is some litigation ongoing with respect to a couple of states here and this particular issue, and so I won't comment on that. What I will say is that, and you've heard me say this and demonstrate this before, that all of our troops are important to us. They're at the top of my priority in terms of their health and well-being, and we want to provide opportunity for everybody who's qualified to serve in our military. And everything that we've done, up to this point reflects that. We'll continue to do everything within our power to take care of our population.
So just related to that in my final moments, it's my understanding that in 2021, DOD issued only about 4,000 prescriptions for PrEP, despite the fact that HIV infection rate among active duty service members has nearly doubled. So what steps has the DOD taken to improve access to PrEP to our service members?
Yeah, I can't answer that question. But I will take it for the record. I'll get back to you on what we're doing or not doing in DOD.
Thank you. I yield.
Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Wilson is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today. As a 31-year Army veteran myself, as a grateful father of 4 service members who've served in Iraq, Egypt, and Afghanistan, I want you to succeed. And that's why I'm concerned, as Sean Hannity has pointed out, that correctly identified, that we're in day 234 since the murder of 13 Americans, service members in Afghanistan, as we left American personnel, Americans behind. I hope that you both can, by immediately providing help to Ukraine now, the most advanced military equipment for victory for the people of Ukraine. We need to show our resolve and show our success for the very brave people of Ukraine who are just remarkably pushing back against Putin. With that in mind, General Austin, the front page of the Washington Post provided on February 28th, it speaks for itself that Putin is threatening, he's a war criminal, I believe, the families of America and our allies with nuclear weapons. Modernization of our strategic nuclear stockpiles should be a top priority moving forward. We cannot expect to deter Putin when the nuclear capabilities are lagging behind theirs. Putin's recent invasion of Ukraine, which included threats of first-strike nuclear attack toward America and our allies, elevated nuclear modernization on the department's priority list. Can you explain the importance of modernization for deterrence?
Thanks, sir. It's absolutely critical. As you've heard me say before, the Triad has served us well over the years, and my goal is to make sure that it continues to do so. And that's why we've invested over $34 billion in this budget towards the modernization of our Triad.
And indeed, what you're saying, peace through strength, works. And also, General, in May 2018, NNSA announced that it would pursue a new approach for the plutonium pit production split between the facilities at Los Alamos and the Savannah River site. The war criminal Putin has the ability to produce plutonium pits, yet the United States currently lacks this ability. Does the Department of Defense continue to support the two-site solution for the plutonium pit production? How can we reasonably expect that this vital program will be adequately supported when the Department's budget request does not even exceed the rate of inflation?
Well, I can assure you that we're going to make sure that that we have the capability that we require to make sure that our Triad remains functional and safe. And so this is a thing that we'll continue to invest in. But we'll maintain the capability to do what needs to be done.
And the two-site solution to with the capabilities of Los Alamos and Savannah River, that's critical that it be two sites?
Well, what's critical is that we maintain the capability that we need. And again, as we look at things going forward, we'll make the right decisions. But my commitment to you is that we will make sure that we have the right capability, adequate capability to be successful.
And the American people need to know many of the pits that we have are 60 years old. And so this is something that's just got to be done, and the two-site solution would really work to the benefit of the American people. And a final question, General. Gruesomely, our treasured ally, India, the world's largest democracy, is choosing to align itself with the Kremlin by choosing Russian weapon systems over American and allied options. What weapons platforms could we offer through the Foreign Military Sales Program that would incentivize Indian leaders to reject Putin and align with its natural allies of democracy?
Well, as you know, we have the finest weapon systems in the world and the most advanced weapon systems in the world, and so we have a range of capabilities that we can provide or offer. We continue to work with them to ensure that they understand that it's not in their best. We believe that it's not in their best interest to continue to invest in Russian equipment, and our requirement going forward is that they downscale the types of equipment that they're investing in, and look to invest more in the types of things that will make us continue to be compatible.
Well, I look forward to you continuing to work with the great people of India, and what a great ally they can be if we eliminate some of the restrictions on sales. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Jacobs is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary Austin and General Milley, for coming to the committee to talk about the FY23 budget request. I know there's been a lot of conversation about the budget and whether it's what we need. In my initial assessment, I believe this budget is more than adequate, and I look forward to working with you on what an adequate budget looks like moving forward. So, we've talked a lot about how much money we're spending, and, I want to talk a little bit about what we're spending money on. I think it's clear that so many of our doctrines and our policies and our weapon systems were designed for threats and challenges that happened in the past, but not necessarily the ones that we're facing now and into the future. And so, I actually think the current war in Ukraine has shown the utility of low-cost weapons over large, expensive legacy systems. And so, Secretary Austin, what do you think the main lessons are for the U.S. and how successful Ukraine has been in fighting back a Russian force? And how do you think that should impact the way DOD does business? I know Chairman Smith touched on this in his opening, but I really want to drill down on if, in light of Ukraine, you think the department should focus more on low-cost weapons and less on new, expensive, and often overly complex platforms that are often not even survivable in high-end environments.
Many of the weapons that have been effective, are not necessarily low cost, but we have been able to provide them in sufficient quantities to make a significant difference. A lot of credit goes to the Ukrainian people for, their will to fight, their determination, their willingness to sacrifice. But given all of that, they had, when the time came, the elements, the right kinds of equipment to be able to make a difference on that battlefield. And we've been pouring it in on a daily basis and increasing not only the quantity but the quality of capability that we've been providing. So there are some lessons to be learned in terms of commitment, leadership, tactics, techniques, and procedures, logistics, integration of different types of platforms, a number of lessons across the board. But a key lesson is that, if you pay attention to the right things and do the right things, armed with the right equipment, a smaller force can be very, very effective, and that's what we're seeing today. So.
Well, thank you. And I do think they're low cost relative to some of the high-end alternatives that we're talking about here today. And I think it shows some of the real limits of the high-end systems that, for instance, Russia had. So moving on to the next topic, Secretary Austin, I and many other members of Congress are looking forward to reviewing the report on civilian casualties. And I'm very appreciative that you've called for a thorough review and have taken this very seriously. So just two quick requests related to that review. First, a few of my colleagues sent you a letter specifically focused on questions related to the strike first reported by the New York Times, which took place in Baghouz, Syria in 2019. Can you commit to us today that we can expect a prompt response to that letter given the seriousness of the questions raised by public reporting?
Yes.
Thank you very much. And secondly, General McKenzie, a few weeks ago, mentioned a list of 10 concrete steps CENTCOM has taken to reduce civilian casualties. General McKenzie personally promised me at the hearing that he'd be transmitting that report to my team shortly, but we have not received it. So can you please assist in urging CENTCOM to promptly provide that list to the committee?
Okay. I certainly would like to see it as well, but I certainly will do that.
Well, thank you. And finally, based on information from NGOs in the media, such as the New York Times civilian casualty files, is DOD planning to revisit cases that were likely prematurely dismissed as a result of faulty initial assessments?
At this point, we don't have an intent to relitigate cases or that from before. Over.
Okay, well, I think that it's important that you do so, since we know in so many of these instances that we've seen some really horrific cases that the initial assessment was declined, and so we were never able to get more information on that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Fallon is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, General Milley, Secretary Austin, Mr. McCord. Inflation is at 8%, and the president's proposed budget, $813 billion, is a 4% increase year over year, which means in real dollars and purchasing power, of course, it's a reduction maybe as much as $30 billion. And in a world ruled, where the Taliban's ruling in Afghanistan after a humiliating withdrawal, we're witness to the largest land invasion we've seen in Europe since World War II, and the saber rattling of the communist Chinese over particularly over the last year. where they increased their defense spending by 7%, and are also using ever more increasing and aggressive rhetoric when it comes to, as they see it, their renegade province of Taiwan. And given these and a host of other threats that we're facing in this real world, to embark on a path to reduce the number of operational ships in our Navy by 24 vessels over the next 5 years, to reduce our active duty Army to the smallest size since World War II, and overall to reduce our active duty force by about a percentage and a half. I just don't think that's the right path, and it's concerning to me. Secretary Austin, at the beginning of November last year, ranking members Rogers and Turner led a letter that myself and a total of 15 members of this committee signed. It's this letter right here. We signed on urging the President and your administration to do two things. Considering the massing that we saw of troops in open source reporting of the sizable Russian presence on the Ukrainian border and their equipment, and I think any level-headed, fair-minded observer would have seen that if invasion wasn't imminent, it was highly likely. We asked for two things. one, to send a significant amount of lethal aid to the Ukraine immediately, and two, to deploy a military presence in the Black Sea. So Secretary Austin, what was the total dollar amount of new lethal aid that was sent? Because I know we sent, the administration sent I think it was $60 million in September of last year. What was the total of new lethal aid that was sent to the Ukraine in November of last year?
Well, I'll just tell you that prior to the invasion, the total amount over time that we provided to Ukraine was $1 billion. And since the invasion, we've also provided another $1 billion.
Do you don't know in November of what that number was?
I don't know how that breaks out in November versus any other month.
Because my concern is that that letter wasn't heeded and we dragged our feet inexplicably for no reason. Secretary, what is the total number of ships we currently have in the Black Sea?
Current U.S. ships in the Black Sea? None.
Yes, sir. None. Okay. Because we historically have kept a presence in the Black Sea. Is that correct? Fair to say?
We have, the presence has ebbed and flowed over time, but there's not been a permanent presence in the Black Sea.
But in 2021, is it true that we had 12 ships in the Black Sea for a total in aggregate of 182 days?
We were rotating in and out on various exercises, working with partner nations, yes.
So my concern is simply that we see this mass buildup, the Russians, and we had a presence in the Black Sea, and now we have no presence at all, and it's almost as if we're cutting tail and running rather than trying to deter a very evil man and the actions that he's taken. And, our worst nightmares from last November have, come to pass.
If I could.
Please.
Because a cut tail and running thing, as you would expect, strikes a chord with...
I don't think your microphone is on, Mr. Secretary. I know it's hard to...
Yeah, if I could, just...
Well, that's what critics would say. I'm not saying, because I think, in a large measure, we're allowing Putin to deter us and not deter him.
So what you've seen, the day after he invaded, we had forces flowing to the Baltics states, to the eastern flank, within 24 hours to reassure and deter. We had aircraft flying policing missions in Romania and Poland right away, within 24 hours. And so Putin, in his best estimate, was that it was going to take months for NATO to react, to respond, to move forces to the eastern flank. But we were there within 24 hours. So that's far from cutting tail and running. And not to mention the incredible capabilities that we've been providing to the Ukrainians who have taken that assistance that we provided along with our allies and partners and used it to good effect.
And Secretary, just with the little time I have remaining, so we have no presence right now in the Black Sea. That's the bottom line now. I went on a CODEL just recently, and I found it interesting that the Romanian Prime Minister said that when I asked him, should we keep our bases in Eastern Europe permanent, he said he didn't think we had any choice. I wanted you to comment on that if you could.
Gentleman's time has expired. So we've got one more questioner. I have some questions I want to give before we get done here, and then we're done. Mr. Moulton is going to be the last questioner, so we'll be done shortly after 2. So if anybody's looking around out there, we're done after Mr. Moulton. I want to follow up on the sub-launched cruise missile, because we're probably going to have an argument over this, and I understand that the general position is more is better, but I don't Mr. Courtney made some, I think, pretty well thought out comments about the impact of turning our attack submarines into nuclear launch submarines and how that would undermine other missions, would complicate the ability to get in there for them to do what they're designed to do. It also potentially has an impact on the AUKUS deal because the Australians are pretty clear on the fact they don't want to be launching nuclear weapons off of a submarine. So, and we are building the long-range standoff weapon. Granted, that's up in the air, not under the sea, but it has a very similar capability. So other than just, well, what the hell, we may as well have more, how do we overcome those concerns about the impact it would have on what the attack subs missions already are and the wisdom of building this missile? And General Milley, you sort of have staked your position that you want the missile, so how do those arguments not undermine that?
There's, was there 50 some odd attack subs in the system? So what we're talking about is building or developing a piece of munition, an ammo. Granted, it's nuclear, but so the weapon itself wouldn't be necessarily on each of those subs. So some of those subs, a small percentage, may have a mission change. The others would not. So I think it's a fair comment from Congressman Courtney about it, but I don't buy that as in terms of the overall. I think that presenting the president, this president or future president, with options. But it's also a moot point. I'm here to defend the president's budget. The president's already made a decision.
I mean, let me
so
assure you, General, it's not actually a moot point.
Well, I mean,
we're still going to fight about it up here. So,
yeah, okay, so
that's why I'm trying to make sure we have the argument. Yeah.
But look, I support the NPR, which is part of the NDS, and we have a lot of nuclear capability. So no foe of the United States should underestimate our capability because of a slick amend, a decision to produce or not produce a slick amend. Our nuclear capability is much, much bigger than that. It is, as you know, a triad, and the amount of throw weight we have, the amount of yield we have in all kinds of different weapon systems, the nuclear weapon systems, is enormous. And so no adversary of the United States should underestimate our capability. Will is a different matter, and whether you use it or not is a different matter. Those are political decisions. But our capability, our nuclear capability, is significant. It's assured. It's capable. And in this budget and in future budgets or past budgets, we are continuing to recapitalize that system. Yeah. So I wouldn't get overly hung up on the slick amend because our nuclear capability writ large, the triad, is very capable to defend the United States.
And that's good. I will point out, as you can tell, there are members of this committee who will get overly hung up on it. So we're trying to work through that and make sure we have the arguments clear and in front of us. And I'm not a submarine person by any stretch of the imagination, but from what I understand, if you're talking about handling nuclear weapons on a submarine, that is an entirely different thing in terms of how you have to train the crew and prepare the crew.
Yeah, that's right.
And even if the nuclear weapons aren't on that particular submarine at that
They'd have to be certified
moment.
Yeah.
And
my only point is I'd like all presidents to have as many options as possible. That's all.
Fair enough. Mr. Moulton is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your continued service to the country and your stamina. You have the weight on your shoulders of protecting freedom around the globe while avoiding a nuclear war every single day, and that's not a weight that many would be able to bear. I was quite critical of the administration's handling of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, but I have to tell you, I think that the last 2 months of Putin's war in Ukraine, you've handled brilliantly. And so I want to sincerely thank you for your leadership that's been so critical to our priorities and to the success of the Ukrainian people. So thank you. The only consistent criticism that I've heard in a bipartisan way on the effort in Ukraine is just simply the speed at which things are moving. You've done all the right things. Some people have said it could move more quickly, and I think that reflects just a broader concern I have with this budget, that we're transforming the force, we're modernizing, you're investing a lot in research and development. My question is, are we moving quickly enough? So I just have a couple of questions on that. Mr. Secretary, you've testified about the various innovation efforts and the DOD's investment in technology, but Defense Innovation University, DIU, which has leveraged $25 billion in private R&D, introduced 100 new suppliers to DOD from 37 states, has been cut in its budget for FY22. Why is that, and is that a wise move for the future? I think they've been incredibly successful.
Well, as we look across the landscape, we want to make sure that, we're putting out dollars where we're going to get good return. And DIU has done amazing work for us over time. And we want to make sure that we're also using other means to encourage initiative and bring new capabilities on board and get the input of entrepreneurs and small companies and that sort of business. But DIU is important to us. It will remain important to us. So that's not a signal that we're phasing DIU out, if that's what
No, Mr. Secretary, it's hard for me, especially as the co-chair of the Future Defense Task Force from a couple years ago, to imagine you not increasing the budget for DIU given their returns. So I'd like to have a more detailed answer for the record, please, on that. And if there's an opportunity for us to increase the budget, that's something we'd like to do. In China, gentlemen, we've seen heavy divestment from the traditional land army. It was a good thing for us that China wasted a lot of time and effort on their million-man army because it was not very effective. They've been pretty dramatic in taking money out of that, downsizing their force, and putting it into other capabilities. As you think about the overall structure of DOD and the balance among the services, are you adapting that balance to meet the threats from China and Russia? Or does each service within your budget essentially still get the same amount of money?
I can assure you that each service does not, and that's always an issue of the great debate. But we're really going after the capabilities that we need, that are relevant to this fight that we could have in the future. And so you've seen significant investment in naval forces and also air forces. And if you look across the FIDEP, that trend continues. But it's not a excuse me, it's not a cookie-cutter approach by any stretch of the imagination.
Mr. Secretary, on the same theme, can you just, I know that the chairman asked this question at the beginning of the hearing, but can you give me two specific lessons that we have learned from Ukraine and explain how those lessons are reflected in changes in this budget? So, are you changing the amount of money that we're investing in artillery or armor or in drones or something like that, given the lessons we've seen on the ground in the last several weeks?
And again, it's still early, and this is a month into the fight, and there will be lessons that we take away from this. But in terms of how it impacts our structure and our warfighting capabilities, we don't. There are no changes that we would desire to make at this point. Again, we'll see how this plays out over time.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask you the same question? Do you think that we should be making changes in our budget based on what we're seeing in Ukraine? I might add the conflict in Azerbaijan gave us a lot of lessons along the same lines.
I'd say two things, not necessarily changes to the budget, but one is the fundamental significance of air defense systems in order to deny an opponent the ability to achieve air superiority or supremacy. That's been done by the Ukrainians, and it's been done with a huge amount of help from the United States with Stingers, et cetera, but also because of our intelligence feeds. So the second big lesson here is intelligence. We have, and I'm not going to go in open hearing about the intelligence we've collected, how we did it and all that, but this war has arguably been the most successful intelligence operation in military history. And it's really tremendous, and someday that story will be told. I guess the third thing is to reinforce the United States doctrinal methodology of mission command, power down, decentralized decision-making to the lowest level possible. The Ukrainians have been trained on that over the last 6 years, actually longer than that, 8 years. That's been very successful.
Expired.
Sorry.
Good answer. And this is a good place to close, I think, because the president's budget is president's budget, but it's a starting point, not an ending point. So a lot of the things that we've talked about here, and as we try to react to the lessons learned from the Ukraine conflict, we have a number of months here to work our will legislatively and in cooperation with the Department of Defense and the President to get to the right answer on this. But I think what Mr. Moulton and a number of other people are talking about is really important, modernizing the force. We've talked about it for a long time. How do we, put ourselves in a position to take advantage of innovation more quickly and recognize how the battlefield has changed within the Pentagon budget. As you know, it's a big process, sort of like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. It's constant. Budget get introduced, requirements get locked in, and Pentagon has built a system around the 5-year plan. One of our frustrations on DIU is DIU does great research on ideas, and if they find something that works, then they got to wait 2 years before they can buy it in many instances. I know there is some fungible money to do that, but the length and the process involved undermines our ability to rapidly react in terms of procurement, acquisition, in terms of how we're going to prioritize things. We are working to try to help you speed that up. And that will be a lot of what we do in the next process. Of course, single most important things, if we can get this done by October 1st, that would help you as well. Gentlemen, you have anything to say for the good of the order? I will allow you closing comments if you have them.
My only closing comment, Chairman, is I want to thank the committee and all of your colleagues writ large for the tremendous support that you've given us, the speed at which you've moved to support our efforts, especially here with Ukraine here in the recent past, and we'll continue this work. This is something that the Chairman and I talk about every day, and so this is not something that's been passed off to a staff officer at a lower level. This has our continued focus, and we remain in contact with our counterparts in Ukraine there. They've performed magnificently, and I think they'll continue that work. I would also point to the fact that what you're seeing with NATO right now is no accident. The President and all of the cabinet members have really leaned into making sure that we are transparent with NATO. We do everything we can to keep NATO unified, and I think, well, I don't think, I know that our colleagues in Europe really appreciate our leadership and what we've done to help them. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We very much. I'm sorry, Chairman Milley. Go ahead.
And ditto. I would like to thank the committee for your continued support as well. And I want to reemphasize what I said in the opening statement. We are at literally, in my view, a pivot point in the geostrategic history of Europe for sure, and perhaps the globe with this invasion of Ukraine. And we've got to do everything we can that's possible without going to war with Russia to ensure that the Ukrainian people remain free and sovereign. That's really critically important to global security. And the third and last point is I'm enormously proud of what this joint force is all about. Every single day these guys come to work. They work hard to defend their country, and they're doing a selfless service for the defense of this nation in support of the Constitution. And nothing could make me prouder than what our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians do every single day, day in and day out.
Yeah, we want to emphasize the last 2 points the Secretary and Chairman Milley made. One, that the hard work that has gone in from Secretary Austin and the entire Biden administration to pull this coalition together, to have the response. And then second, what you're seeing in Ukraine, we have been working to train the Ukrainians for a very long time. It shows. So we should be very proud of that. And I do also want to thank the committee, I think, with one notable exception. This was a very, very good discussion of the issues in what we're looking for. And as far as that notable exception goes, I looked it up. Sadly, I don't have the power to simply take a member's time away. So if they're going, they're going. But other than that, I think this committee did a really good job of analyzing the issues. As I said, this is the start of the process. We got a lot of work to do between now and when we produce a final product, and look forward to working with all of you to get that done to the best of our ability. And with that, we are adjourned.